Call of Duty is a series that nearly everyone in the gaming scene has some sort of opinion about. Some see it as a revolutionary franchise that helped usher in the modern era of online gaming and raise the bar on production values for video games as an art form. Others think that it exemplifies everything wrong with the medium and has been responsible for some of the worst trends in the AAA industry. Regardless of where you fit on the spectrum, one thing is universally agreed upon. The Call of Duty series has been incredibly influential on not just the people who played it, but the entire industry as a whole. Its magnitude is a large part of why Sony's ever-going efforts to block the Activision and Microsoft merger have been as strong as they are. COD scale is why even when a title is quote-unquote disappointing in regards to sales, it still stands head and shoulders above everything else in the industry every single year. This massive rise in notoriety has all started with the game that we will be covering today, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. For this video, I'm mainly going to be lumping in both the original release of COD 4 and the remastered release that came out in 2016. But where the two versions differ, I will make some comments on. So, what was it about COD 4 that made it such a landmark title? How does this game still hold up today? And ultimately, what was the impact that it made on the industry? Well, let's talk about Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. After the release of Call of Duty 2, developers Infinity Ward had the desire to move away from the World War II setting. During the planning process, Infinity Ward did an unheard of move in the games industry, and actually planned the entire Modern Warfare storyline from beginning to end across the three games. Man, what a concept. During the development, Infinity Ward would regularly work with veterans to verify the authenticity of the mocapping and AI, and would even visit some Marine Corps bases in order to get a feeling of what it was like to be around some of the equipment that was being used. They also decided to really limit the amount of real-world events that were being used in the game because, well, let's just say the mid-2000s were a difficult time to talk about the United States' relations to the Middle East. Aside from that decision, the development for Call of Duty 4 was actually pretty smooth. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was released in November of 2007 to Xbox 360, PS3, and PC, and it even saw a Wii release in 2009. The game scored in the low to mid-90s on Metacritic. During their review of the title, GameSpot said, "The high quality of the campaign and its terrific multiplayer options make Call of Duty 4 a fantastic package." While in X-Play's review, they said, "It may not revolutionize the shooter genre, but it comes damn close to perfecting it." The lead up to this game's release saw it have an absolute blood feud with Halo 3, and in the sales departments, these games went blow for blow. But ultimately, COD 4 walked away as the victor, selling over 2 million copies within its first month, 7 million copies by January 2008, and 13 million copies by May of 2009. This made it the best-selling game of 2007, beating out other landmark titles such as Halo 3, Super Mario Galaxy, BioShock, Mass Effect. Yeah, there were a ton of big games in 2007. This success would go into the accolades as COD 4 earned multiple nominations and wins for sound design, action game, as well as overall game of the year from a number of publications. So I think it really goes without saying that Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare is one of the most important shooters of all time. It's a game that completely changed the landscape of not just the FPS genre, but for online gaming in general. The multiplayer was fun, addictive, and along with Halo 3, was really a launchpad for console online gaming. It also had a very strong campaign with memorable characters, incredible set pieces, a decent amount of variety in its missions, and a message that permeated throughout the 7-hour adventure. It is truly a stellar game, and even after the nearly 20 other mainline entries, many still consider this to be the high point of the series. However, there are a couple things to take note of with the current online experience as well as the remastered PC port that ultimately tarnish this game's legacy. Aside from those two admittedly large problems, I believe that Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare still stands as one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time. So what stayed the same between Call of Duty 3 and Call of Duty 4? Well, quite a lot actually. The campaign still funnels you down linear gameplay sections, ducking behind cover, shooting enemies. There'll occasionally be a big set piece in a level to either break up the gameplay or wow the player, and the cutscenes are still in the cinematic style that we've seen with the earlier entries. The gunplay and really combat as a whole has a few minor tweaks to fit into the new setting, but for the most part it's pretty familiar territory. There also exists an online multiplayer component, though it was never more prevalent before than it was in COD 4. So as you could probably see, there wasn't too much of a change when it comes to the moment-to-moment gameplay, but instead a refinement of what worked in CODs 1, 2, and 3, and bringing them into what was then the modern era. Before I make a deep dive into the quality of Call of Duty 4, one thing has to be made abundantly clear. This game, when it comes to its multiplayer component, is something I do not advise playing. This isn't due to any creative or gameplay decision from the development side, however, just a lack of security support given to not only COD 4, but all the Call of Duty titles prior to Black Ops 3. At best, playing these old CODs feel just as good as they did on release. You might run into an occasional hacker with an aimbot, but it's mostly a similar experience. At worst, both PC and console players have been reporting hackers kicking them from games, resetting their level progression, or even worse, remotely controlling their devices to receive personal information. To put a long story short, playing these games online is simply unsafe. Several of the third-party servers that have been put up to stop this behavior, such as XLabs, have also been shut down by Activision, limiting the alternative options. Worse off, Activision seems to have no plan set in place to actually address this issue, even with these games remaining online. So if you think to yourself, I can avoid the hackers of the standard version of COD 4 by playing the 2016 remaster, well, boy do I have some news for you. Modern Warfare Remastered, at least the Steam version, barely works. Upon launching the game for the first time, you'll probably come across an error message claiming that there's not enough memory. I was able to get around this thanks to a file I downloaded from a third-party website and replaced some of the items in the installation folder. Then I encountered another error when I attempted to load into the mission, The Bog, which I was able to fix after disabling the shader preloads in the options menu. There would be several times I would open the game and my display settings would be completely changed. I had a number of crashes. When loading into the multiplayer, I would get stuck unless I told the game to cancel the shader preloads. Because of all of this, absolutely no one is playing this version of the game. This is still being sold for $40 on Steam. This is simply unacceptable. From what I know, the console version is fairly stable, but I cannot recommend buying this game on Steam unless you are prepared to do some fixing. To talk about some of the positive of Modern Warfare's presentation, I don't think there's a better starting point than the graphics. Call of Duty games have always been near the top of the food chain in this department, and COD 4 is no exception to this rule. Each environment is chock full of detail, from the random items you see sitting on tables to all the posters in the background. Each level in Modern Warfare feels lived in and realistic for the setting. The mocap for the characters was some of the best for 2007, with characters having animations that may only show up once in the game, but add a ton to the characters that they represent. One of my favorite pieces of art design that this game uses is the mission briefing before each level in the campaign. These absolutely ooze with style. When I think back to COD 4, these are some of the first things that really come to mind. All of this was updated in the 2016 remaster of the game, and this version still looks fantastic to this day. Plus, with how expansive the graphical options are in the remaster, you really can cater to your preference for how you want the game to look and perform. One of the other big things that I really enjoy about Modern Warfare is the audio design. Holy shit, man. This audio design is still amazing, and in many ways has yet to be outdone. Let me gush real quick about the sound design you hear in the multiplayer. It's absolutely blood pumping. The guns all sound crunchy, maybe not up to the standards of the modern Call of Duties, but they are still pretty solid. The pre- and post-match music and announcers, god, they sound so good and they really get you pumped. And it's something I think is missing from the newer CODs. Also, the sound effects for leveling up, iconic. The voice acting in the campaign is also great too. I think the Marines sound a little too much like they have a stick up their ass, but for the most part, the performances from Price and Gaz really help give the game that cinematic quality. The music also shows some really great range, and when you have the composer who worked on the Fairy Godmother song from Shrek 2 on your team, you know you're in good hands. So Infinity Ward made a bold move from taking Call of Duty out of World War II and into the modern era. They weren't the first FPS to be set in modern times, but after this game came out, it essentially spelt the end for the World War II shooter for quite some time. The game primarily takes place within the confines of Russia and the Middle East, focusing on Saudi Arabia and Iraq specifically. So, the game only being limited to a few countries, one of the challenges you might assume may be the environment becoming a little stale. I think Modern Warfare does a good job with its level variety within the scope that it's given. We get the cluttered, war-stricken cities, mountain ranges, and military compounds you might expect, but every once in a while we get something different from those areas, such as the beginning on a cargo ship in the Bering Strait, a flashback to 15 years ago in Pripyat, or in a hijacked aircraft in undisclosed airspace. Now that being said, there was a stretch that I did start to feel some fatigue with the Russian mountains near the end of the campaign. Thankfully, since the campaign is short, I didn't feel like this overstayed its welcome too long. Call of Duty 4's cast of characters are honestly kind of a mixed bag. Firstly, any characters we play as are mutes, so Soap, Jackson, Younger Price, all silent, which I honestly think is a little strange, especially in Price's case considering he talks when he's older, so why have him mute? When Captain Price does speak, he's easily the standout of the game. The guy just oozes charisma, and he's not a deep character by any means, but you can't help but like the guy because he's kind of a badass. Honestly, a lot of the characters on the SAS have a lot of those same qualities. Maybe it's the British accent, I don't know. The Marines are fine, but pretty unremarkable. The voice acting for these Marines is exactly what you would think if I told you to imagine a slightly exaggerated version of Marine, which is silly at times, but mostly okay. The villains, I think, are also decent, but mostly underutilized. Both Al-Assad and Zakhaev have great designs, memorable moments, and an imposing presence, but we don't really get enough time with them to leave a big impact. Instead, they both act as a sort of setup for a much bigger villain in COD 4's 2 sequels. So I think the story for Modern Warfare does a really good job in regards to its pacing. This is a campaign that really keeps the fast-paced action sequences coming, but also knows how to let things breathe. It does this by giving us control over multiple characters across different factions with different perspectives, and I think this approach works as opposed to the earlier Call of Duties that would sometimes have separate campaigns based off of their nationality. I also enjoy the much greater focus on making this campaign feel like a cinematic experience. There are plenty of times throughout the game that they take advantage of the first-person perspective to punctuate a number of key set pieces and moments. The plot itself is kind of what you'd expect, with very little in the way of subverting your expectations, but that's fine, I think it's still entertaining. It's not groundbreaking, but it definitely has a ton of memorable moments, and it's easy to equate this thing to something like a Marvel movie or an 80s action flick such as Terminator. The writing is another area in this game that I think to some may just see it as serviceable, but to me, I absolutely love it. God damn if there aren't so many quotable lines from this game. What the hell kind of name is Soap? Your fruit killing skills are remarkable. On your feet, soldier, we are leaving. Or, and say it with me, 50,000 people used to live here, now it's a ghost town. These lines of dialogue aren't saying anything profound. Hell, one of them is literally about the way you murdered a watermelon, but you recognize all of these quotes. They all stick out in your mind, and for many of us, we have quoted something like this at least once before in a different situation. To me, that is just as valid as a form of excellent writing. Granted, the delivery has a lot to do with making those lines so great, but goddamn do I still love how this game is written, with how over-the-top action movie-esque the quips can be, and how memorable they are. The set pieces are oftentimes one of the most talked about or memorable things within a Call of Duty game, at least on the campaign side. This was something true with the original COD, and it's an even bigger focus in COD 4. Now let's talk about these set pieces because holy shit. In a Hollywood movie, a lot of these could definitely serve as the climax to the film, but for COD 4, you get one of these like every couple of missions. Escaping a cargo freighter as it's sinking, running from the ultra-nationalist Russians through the empty streets of Pripyat. What about jumping out of a plane with a hostage after a massive shootout on board? Or how about having a nuclear bomb go off in the middle of a mission? Like, excuse me? Yeah, probably the game's biggest set piece is when in an attempt to capture Al-Assad's nuclear device, he detonates the bomb in the middle of the mission while the player is in a helicopter. What an absolute spectacle. And then you crawl through the streets overlooking the damage that was caused. Just absolutely insane. This game is one of the few Call of Duties that I feel like has gone out of its way to not just be a Hollywood action flick, but also has something to say. That message?
War is hell.
Now, the obvious examples are the war statistics and anti-war quotes that are presented every time the player dies, but one of the more prime examples comes very early on in the game, where the player takes control of the president of Saudi Arabia in a hostage situation, driving through the streets and seeing the atrocities of war at first hand. On the other side of the spectrum, there's a mission where a player gets to be a gunner in an AC-130. This whole time, Air Force soldiers are talking about killing the ultra-nationalists with such a calm and disconnected demeanor, almost closer to like if they were playing COD 4 themselves rather than being in an actual war. Of course, the best example might come from the level Aftermath, where the player only crawls through the streets after a nuke has been set off, sees soldiers dying in horrific ways while a mushroom cloud ominously looms over. These are all powerful moments that stick with you a long time after finishing Call of Duty 4. When looking at Call of Duty 4's gameplay, the thing that immediately jumps out is the new engine. Now, the IW 3.0 engine does a lot of things from adding ragdoll to death animations, particle and lighting effects, to having more realistic explosions. The two main gameplay innovations that I want to highlight are the improvements to AI and the addition of bullet penetration. With the improvements to AI, we get to see encounters play out slightly differently with each playthrough. Enemies will now take cover more effectively, they will try to flank, and your allies will do the same. The bullet penetration also adds quite a bit to the game too. See, in old Call of Duties, if you were behind cover, you were safe, no questions asked. Now, some cover can be shot through depending on the material and thickness of that material. This has an effect on the bullet's stopping power, but this creates the opportunity for far more complex level design possibilities, as well as weapons with different penetration power. Call of Duty campaigns were founded on a basic design principle that still rings true to this day. Guide the player through linear objective-based sections, being sandwiched in between memorable and jaw-dropping set pieces. This is still very true in Modern Warfare. Campaign missions are often these hallway-like areas that operate as shooting galleries that may have the occasional objective thrown in to be punctuated by a climactic moment. It's a formula that works very well, as it keeps the gameplay focused on the shooting while providing enough variation to remain interesting. Modern Warfare's campaign missions have so many memorable sections. Who can get the first time they ran through the tutorial and tried to get their time as low as possible? Or how about operating the AC-130 from above the clouds to rain death on the ultra-nationalists? Or my personal favorite, everything in the mission all gillied up. Sneaking through Pripyat, stealthily taking down patrols, quietly moving underneath the enemy's noses. God, this mission was so good. Now, while COD 4's campaign is for the most part a linear experience, there are a few things that you can go out of your way to get in order to get some more playtime and extra bonuses. Scattered throughout the campaign levels of Modern Warfare are collectible enemy intel that can be recovered in order to get some extra unlockables. These are essentially just cheats that you can get to slightly alter the gameplay experience. Most of these cheats really only amount to changing the graphics to a different filter, but some of them have some very interesting gameplay implications, such as turning all grenades into clusters or giving every enemy an RPG-7 as their weapon. These don't come close to the skulls from Halo in my opinion, but I think they're fun and harmless enough. Call of Duty games for the longest time have typically been this three-ring circus style of offer, where they have a campaign, usually, a multiplayer, and a third mode of sorts such as zombies or spec ops. Believe it or not, COD 4 was actually the start of this tradition with the addition of arcade mode. So arcade mode is very similar to the Mercenaries mode from the Resident Evil games if you're familiar with those. Keep your multiplier up by killing enemies in rapid succession, dying will bring your combo down, and complete the campaign mission with as high a score as possible. This mode doesn't have as much to offer as Resident Evil's version. I definitely didn't spend too much time with this either, but this mode is still a fun addition that can add a few extra hours to your playtime if you're interested. Alright, so the big thing that drew a lot of people into Call of Duty 4 and really made the franchise what it is today is the multiplayer. Now, back in 2007, online multiplayer for console games was really starting to get its footing, and at the forefront of this new wave was Call of Duty 4. During this time, Xbox Live was becoming more and more commonplace, the PlayStation Network was following suit, and of course, online gaming had already been a thing for a long time on PC. And with COD 4's simultaneous launch on all of these platforms, it was able to capitalize on all of those markets. The accessibility to party up with friends, jump right into a game, and have some fun was pivotal in making Modern Warfare a household name in the late 2000s. This was a system tailor-made for console gamers to experience what PC gamers were feeling for years with the likes of Counter-Strike, Unreal Tournament, Battlefield, and even earlier Call of Duty games. Though this only scratches the surface of what made COD 4's multiplayer so remarkable. Call of Duty 4's multiplayer's defining feature is its create a class system. Before Call of Duty 4, nearly every single multiplayer shooter relied on either placing weapons throughout the arena that would require the player picking them up, or having the player make a selection at the start of the match. Even earlier Call of Duties were no exception to this. In Call of Duty 4, however, they introduced a system that allowed players to have a much greater control over what they want their loadout to be. This feature allows people to pick a primary weapon with an attachment, assuming the weapon allows for it, a secondary weapon, a tactical grenade, as well as up to 3 perks to further define your character. This system really allows players to carve out a playstyle for themselves that could be very different from any of the other players in the game at that time. This allows people to experiment, try silly builds, or create the most powerful thing they can in order to come out on top. Going hand in hand with the create a class system is another feature that Modern Warfare brought forward, and that's its progression system. Now, as you finish matches, get kills, complete challenges, and capture objectives, you will gain experience points. These experience points level the player up, which unlocks new weapons and perks for them to use. The level cap goes all the way up to 55, and when that cap is reached, the player can choose to prestige and make their way through the level cap all over again. This is a system that really piques players' curiosity, as when they unlock a new weapon or perk, they may want to immediately try it and see if it's something that they enjoy. This in turn brings more experimentation with the create a class system, creating a very addicting gameplay loop that sees players wanting to perform well in-game and always work on something else to reach that next unlock. It's all worth it to see the golden variations of such popular weapons such as the M60E4, AK-47, and of course, the Desert Eagle. The weapon choice was one of the most crucial decisions when creating a class. This is the introduction to the 5 weapon types that we are all familiar with and we see in every modern COD, so I'll go ahead and list them in what I believe is best to worst. First off, assault rifles are my favorite weapon types in COD 4, with some of the highlights being the AK-47, M4 carbine, and of course the most OP gun in the game, the M16A4. Next we have submachine guns, with such strong options as the MP5, AK-74U, and P90. After that, I would say the snipers are next. The M40A3 and the Bear 50 cal are super great options, while the Dragunov begins its streak as the worst gun in every single game it ever appears in. Next we have the LMGs. These are just kind of alright. I like the RPD, but the M60E4 and the M249 SAW are a little bit underwhelming. Finally, we have shotguns as the worst. We only have the W1200 and the M1014 to choose from, and I honestly think they're both pretty weak. Every class also gets their choice of a sidearm, which just pick the Desert Eagle, it's by far the best handgun. The perk choices are the second most crucial component for the create a class system. These essentially give your character passive bonuses to a number of areas, which are divided into 3 categories. The blue perks give players extra equipment to work with, such as more ammo and grenades, or the usage of C4, claymores, or even an RPG-7. The red perks are what I consider to be the cornerstone of your kit. These are often the most powerful perks, giving players extra health, faster reload speeds, allowing them to carry 2 primary guns, being undetectable on a UAV, and having a faster fire rate. These are all awesome, but everybody just picks stopping power anyway. I mean, come on, it's literally the most applicable and it's free damage. Lastly is yellow, which is what I consider the perks that are typically not as strong as red, but they still provide some decent buffs. Being able to sprint for longer, reduce hipfire spread, muffle the sound of your footsteps, hear enemies' voice chat in game, which is admittedly useless, and even drop a grenade or fall to the ground and pull out a pistol upon death, which is admittedly pretty annoying. Outside of the create a class system, one of the most notable changes is the addition of the Killstreaks system. In COD 4, it's admittedly a little bit more bare bones than what we have now, but it's still interesting to see the beginnings of such a commonplace feature. In Modern Warfare, Killstreaks are earned by accumulating 3, 5, and 7 kills in a row. If the player is to die, their counter is set back to 0. After the 3rd kill, the player is able to call a UAV to add a sweeping radar to the team's minimap to reveal the location of enemies. After 5, the player is able to target a portion of the map with an airstrike. Finally, after 7, an AI-controlled helicopter joins the battlefield to pick up extra kills for the player who called it in. After the final kill streak is earned, the player's count does not reset, which is a bit of a bummer. You also have to make sure that you use an earlier obtained kill streak before you get a new one, lest you waste that kill streak, as these do not stat. I think this is a pretty decent system that might seem a little primitive to what we have available now, but is overall still good. Call of Duty 4 sees by far the most available game modes up to that point in the series at the time. We of course see a number of game modes return, such as Team Deathmatch, Free-for-All, Search and Destroy, and Headquarters, but there are also a ton of new additions. Domination sees 2 teams try to capture and hold 3 different objectives to gain points. Sabotage sees each team try to capture a neutral bomb to plant in the opposing team's base. There are also some variants to these game modes to spice things up. Ground War sees the player count rise from 12 to 18. Hardcore removes the HUD, reduces the player's health by 60%, and adds friendly fire. Team Tactical and Cage Match reduces the team fights to 3v3 and 1v1 respectively. Mercenary TDM essentially just bans parties from playing together, which is okay, but was never something I cared much for. The most underrated mode though? Old School. This essentially turns COD into an old school arena shooter, giving every player double health, unlimited sprint, extra jump height, no fall damage, extra ammo, and weapon and perk pickups throughout the map. God, this mode is awesome. Another thing I absolutely love about COD 4 is the map design. I will go on record to say that I think the maps in Call of Duty 4 are the best group in the entire series and one of the best in the FPS genre. A big reason for this is that every map feels incredibly distinct from one another. They each cater to different different playstyles and game modes well, and they are all incredibly memorable. I love how some maps such as Overgrown, Bog, and Countdown have these long sightlines, making sniping a very powerful option in these scenarios. On the opposite side, I also love how some maps such as Shipment, Vacant, and Wetwork can be incredibly chaotic with SMGs and explosives because of how compact they are. Plus, who doesn't like fighting for control over powerful spots on the map, such as the upper areas of Pipeline, the Sniper's Nest and Backlot, or of course, the massive tower in Crash, my personal favorite map in the series. Call of Duty 4 eventually received a number of DLC. Now, a lot of them were just reskins of maps such as Crash, Downpour, and Bog, but shortly after the game's release, 4 additional maps were released in the Variety map pack. The first map is Broadcast. While it is a larger map, it isn't too big that you can't find anyone, and it's always fun seeing the different ways you can infiltrate the broadcast station. Next is Chinatown, which is actually a remake of the map Carentan from Call of Duty 1. This map is great, visually one of the most distinct in the game, and has a really unique layout given that it's from a previous era of COD. Next up is Creek, which while it is my least favorite map out of the 4, I still think it's pretty decent, but it does kind of feel like a less cohesive version of Overgrown at times. And then finally we have Kill House, which seems to be the fan favorite from this group. It's super symmetrical and honestly feels very much like a map that would fit right in with the maps from the modern day. When Call of Duty 4 received its 2016 remaster, the philosophy was to keep the core gameplay the same, add more, and take nothing away. Whether they succeeded is up for debate, but one thing that I think they did really well was the addition of new game modes from the modern Call of Duty titles. We got to see Capture the Flag return, which actually surprised me wasn't in the original version. We also saw the addition of popular game modes that debuted in later CODs, such as Demolition, Kill Confirmed, Hardpoint, Prop Hunt, and Gun Game. A few of the reskinned maps received 24/7 playlists, including Winter Crash, Daybreak, and Beach Bog. Finally, the Weekend Warfare playlist was added, bringing in fun, random game modes such as Pistols and Shotguns Only, RPGs Only, and Slasher, which was similar to the popular fan-made mode, Michael Myers. So while the remastered version of Modern Warfare added a ton of new game modes, updated the graphics, and brought the game to more modern hardware, they also added one thing that was not well received. It wasn't bad enough that they made you pay for the Variety map pack again instead of releasing it with the game at launch, but now you also have a loot box-like system that gives players new camos, skins for their soldiers, and most egregiously, exclusive weapons that cannot be unlocked by any other means other than through these microtransactions. There have literally been people who have spent hundreds of dollars in an attempt to get some of these weapons, only to have their money be completely wasted by bad RNG. Worst of all, this system still exists in the game, even when the Steam release is still broken. I would love to show you these weapons and tell you what I think their impact on the game is, but the thing is, it doesn't matter considering no one is playing this game on PC, and even if they were, these weapons would still be very rare. Coupled with the performance issues, this really leaves a sour taste in my mouth for Modern Warfare Remastered. So, is Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare worth a recommendation? Well, that is a tricky thing to answer. If you are looking for a fun and short single-player campaign to shoot some bad guys, look at pretty graphics, and see some marvelous set pieces, then this is an easy recommendation. COD 4 represents a changing of the guard for shooters and is still one of the most important games in history, so it is definitely worth looking into if you're curious. However, if you are looking for a functional, active, and safe competitive shooter, I strongly advise that you look elsewhere. The original release is plagued with hackers, and Activision continually thwarts the community's effort to provide a safe alternative. The PC release of the remaster version is basically unplayable as there is simply no community for it, leaving the console version of COD 4 Remastered, which I've heard is admittedly pretty decent. Assuming you don't run into any of these issues, or you do private matches in COD 4 Remastered, you can still have a really great time. Your mileage may vary, but please be safe and responsible when making your decision. After Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was released, the series absolutely exploded into the mainstream and became a household name among gamers. COD 4 received frequent patch updates and occasional DLC, while fellow Call of Duty development team Treyarch would work on their next title in the series, Call of Duty World at War. This game essentially took the World War II setting seen in earlier Call of Duties and applied it to the established formula in Call of Duty 4. While the game wasn't as successful as COD 4 and the initial reception wasn't as strong, it has since gone on to become one of the most acclaimed games in the franchise. Meanwhile, Infinity Ward was hard at work on their follow-up to COD 4, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This game doesn't need too much of an introduction, being the title that took everything that Modern Warfare 1 did and cranked it up to 11. That, however, is a story for another day. But that's all I got for you guys today, so thank you for watching. What was your favorite memory of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section down below, and hey, if you enjoyed today's video, maybe consider giving it a like and subscribing. Thank you guys again, and I'll catch you in the next video.